Katie from Nerd Church here. Okay, if you've seen the Holy Week videos and you've seen some of the explaining popular religion videos, you may have noticed my geeky enthusiasm. And you may have said to yourself, "Self, did did these people lie to me when they said that this is a non-proselytizing channel?" And you're right. I wasn't telling people entirely the truth because we do proselytize. We proselytize about the stuff that we like. So, Aldo, who really doesn't care that much about the Catholic Church, he proselytizes about the Hebrew Bible. Amanda proselytizes about the few things about Baptist theology that she liked and were not horrible. And she proselytizes about the fact that even though she and I agree on 90% of things in life, that I will never become Anglican and she will never become Catholic, and that is okay. So, about religion, we don't proselytize because all of us kind of agree with the proposition that all religions are, at least to the extent they comport with basic ethical principles and don't involve actually harming anybody, are really okay. And, if you want to use the fancy Catholic word and say positively willed by God, we're willing to go with that, right? So we don't want you to change your religion. We just want you to understand that if you're shopping for a new religion, if you need a new spiritual technology, if your religion broke and you can't fix it, and you are looking for a new model, that we are going to inform you about your options, let you check it out, let you kick the tires, and there is no pressure to buy. And if you want to come and make fun of us, make fun of us. Just don't lie. And understand that someone with a degree in religious studies is going to roast you back. And I've got a Ceratosaurus who is willing to white knight for the Catholic Church just because he hates stupidity more. He hates stupidity enough that he is willing to read the Baltimore Catechism. I am not Catholic enough to want to read the Baltimore Catechism unless I am doing it as an academic project. And I read the actual Catechism of the Catholic Church, the entire freaking brick. And I hold it up and I love it, and I call it the Player's Handbook. Because that is what I mean when I say Nerd Church does proselytize. We proselytize about cool stuff, right? The Catechism of the Catholic Church is fun to read in the same way that a D&D rulebook is fun to read. And if Catholic is not your preferred gaming system, I understand that, but I hope that I can at least talk to you about my favorite rulebook, because this is the rulebook that I actually use to LARP. Like I have figured out how to LARP full time as a Catholic woman by using, in large part, the Player's Handbook. So, you know what? Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is me. I am talking about my favorite hyperfixation because that's what nerds do. And that's why I made an entire video for Kip Davis trying to explain Howl. that was ultimately the thing that sent me onto this bizarre vision quest that is making me have insights that really feel like me putting together a lot of the stuff that I've been trying to intellectualize for literally my entire life. And the reason why that happened was because I was having a conversation with Kip Davis, and it got very silly. And I was trying to explain apostolic succession in terms of Allen Ginsberg, the fact that there is a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon type relationship between Allen Ginsberg and Allen Ginsberg and Walt Whitman that is in some ways analogous to apostolic succession. And some of the beat poets have apostolic succession by this from Walt Whitman by this metric, and some of them do not. And there may be gay poets walking the earth today who have apostolic succession from Walt Whitman, and there may be heterosexual there may be poets all over Denver, Colorado who have apostolic succession from Walt Whitman via Allen Ginsberg, via Neal Cassady, and if you know, you know. And if you don't know, I will tell you, and if you request that video, because it's a really funny story. But the point is that I was in a very strange conversation with Kip Davis, and I was trying to explain apostolic succession. So I tried to use that metaphor, right? Because I assumed that Kip Davis had at least heard of Allen Ginsberg. Because I knew that there was no, or if he hadn't heard of Allen Ginsberg, I could at least explain Walt Whitman and it would ring a bell. Because I knew that Kip Davis is a man who loves poetry, and he loves oral poetry, and Allen Ginsberg is probably okay, Kip, you want to know who Allen Ginsberg is? Allen Ginsberg is the first Jewish poet Allen Ginsberg is the first Jewish poet who ever wrote in English, who was a Jewish poet who was doing oral composition that he wrote down. If you want to understand who the prophets were, you need to read Allen Ginsberg, because Allen Ginsberg was a prophet. And I could freak out and just start reciting song at you, and I'm going to stop, and instead I'm going to make a separate video of Katie reciting song, because I need you to understand what I mean. But my point is that I had to explain to Kip Davis who Allen Ginsberg was in a way that would make sense to him in about 2 seconds. And the only way that I had to do that was to flip open and read the last stanza of Sunflower Sutra. And the problem is I haven't memorized the last stanza of Sunflower Sutra. So I had to go look for it in my other brain. And my other brain is a copy of Howl and Other Poems. Except that I can't find that copy, because even after I bought a copy of Howl at City Light Heights bookstore in San Francisco, California, that I keep as a genuine, honest-to-God, holy relic, sometimes it goes missing. And it was missing from my bookshelf. And I literally had, and when I went up to look, ran to look for it, and I couldn't find it, it felt like part of my brain was gone. Because until I had that book, I didn't have my whole brain, because I didn't have that poem. And I couldn't give it to Kip Davis because I haven't had time to go to a bookstore and get a copy of that book. And I'm going to do that in a little bit because it is literally hurting my soul that I don't have a copy of Howl to put as the cover for this video when this video goes up. So, in that moment, I understood what writing had given me and what writing had taken away. Because if I didn't have that book, I would have memorized that poem. Because I have pieces of his poetry, like, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed my madness, who stalked the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters screaming for the infinite heavenly connection. And then I get lost. I get lost because Howl is too long for anyone except the man who wrote it to recite, and even he had to write it down. So I couldn't give you that poem. And I didn't know if I could give you the first part of Howl. I didn't know if you would understand it. And I didn't know, and that was not the time or the place for me to try to explain why it was okay for me to start reciting the 1950s version of the Song of Solomon. And because that's the only Ginsberg poem that I know well enough, and I always flub a couple of lines in the middle. It's a scribal error. It's a scribal error that happens in my head. I need a prompt copy. I need a prompter. I need a reader. I need a reader to check the recitation. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that I realized that part of my brain was gone. But then I remembered that I had written like parts and chunks and sections of poetry into that book by Anthony Oliveira that I also held up that you also need to read. Because Anthony Oliveira made a gospel. It's his gospel. It's him telling you everything that you need to know about him for you to understand everything that he knows about God. And that's what Dayspring is. Dayspring is an apocryphal gospel. Only this time you can talk to the man who wrote it, and he writes really good comic books. He cannot draw to save his soul, and he is hilarious, and he has a podcast, and his name is Anthony Oliveira, and he's a really cool guy, and he made an apocryphal gospel. So if you want to know what that feels like, just go on Patreon, search for Devil's Party. You want to talk to Luke? Luke's alive, and maybe John is too, but I don't know. I think Anthony's really more of a Luke type. Like, I could see him like following Paul around with some kind of like weird man crush, and I'm sorry for saying this, Anthony. Um, and yes, I will be posting this on my Patreon. I will not be linking to my Patreon because I need to make sure that Anthony Oliveira is not going to insist that I take this video down. But the point is that I took his gospel and I read it, and I saw a couple pieces of Allen Ginsberg's poetry in there. And I immediately said to myself, Self, this book is almost perfect. Except this book needs about 20% more Allen Ginsberg. So I put in the missing Allen Ginsberg. So now we have the Bricolage. So now we have Luke. And now we have the additions to Luke, all coming from modern sources, mainly the poetry of Allen Ginsberg, mainly Howl. And I went flipping through the book because in my memory, I had just put like little like snatches and bits and pieces. And sometimes I had even altered things. Like I stuck the names of my friends in there instead of the names of people that I didn't want to invoke in the holy, holy, holy section. But that was okay because that was me, because it's my book, it's my personal copy. Who cares if I sneak in a little joke and I say Petra instead of Jack, right? But I couldn't find, what I couldn't find was Sunflower Sutra. Why couldn't I find Sunflower Sutra? I couldn't find Sunflower Sutra because I hadn't written in pieces of Sunflower Sutra. At the end of the book, because Anthony gave us fat margins and a lot of end papers, I had copied the entirety of Song and Sunflower Sutra in the back of the book so that they didn't get lost. Because even if I lost all of my copies of Allen Ginsberg, I would have the important parts of Howl, Kaddish, and Mind Breaths. And I would have the entirety of the two most important poems to me that he ever wrote. And I would have, check this out, this is the beauty part, I would have also edited out just the parts of Howl that I knew for a fact needed to survive. Because frankly, there's some of the stuff in the middle of Howl that gets kind of weird, and maybe we want to keep it and maybe we don't. Because like there's this whole invocation to Moloch, that if you understand what Allen Ginsberg means, and you understand that Allen Ginsberg was was the son of a Russian Jew who became an atheist and was a communist, and he himself converted to Buddhism, and that for him Moloch was the bad part of the Industrial Revolution. The Moloch portion has juice, but if you understand Moloch in terms of abortion, it is not worth keeping. But I stuck it in there anyway. But I didn't read it aloud because that would have been off-putting. But the point is that that's intertextuality, that's orality. That's what happens when poetry meets prose and goes back again, and then other people put their things in, and it's not always their poetry. But I've thought about getting that line tattooed on my skin. And the only reason why I haven't is because I haven't felt like I've needed to, because I can recite most of Song by Allen Ginsberg from memory. And I can probably write it down from memory if I have to. And I'm going to show that in another video, because this has gotten long and self-indulgent, and I'm sorry. But I'm going to recite that video from memory. I'm going to go to a bookstore and I'm going to find a copy of Song and I'm going to read it aloud to you. And I want you to see how close my version is to the version in the text. And see if you can even track down Allen Ginsberg's recording of Song. I haven't heard it. Or at least I haven't heard it that I can remember. It got used once in a Blue Jeans commercial. And that was the thing. So yeah, Google Song Allen Ginsberg Blue Jeans. It came out in the, I don't know, mid-90s. And then, so compare my oral performance, my performance of the written text, maybe any other recordings that you can find, and just see what you think. Just throwing that out there. Okay, guys? So, anyway, this is me, I don't know, doing participant observer research, if you want to call it that. So, yeah, see you on the flip side.